It is my deep conviction that we have reached a turning point in the long history of our country's efforts to guarantee freedom and equality to all our citizens.
President Harry Truman addressed the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People on June 29, 1947. He foreshadowed a coming age of significant changes in the controversial area of civil rights for blacks. A year later, he made a decision which fundamentally altered the nation's approach to equality for all Americans. Although change was not immediate, Truman's Executive Order 9981 not only effectively desegregated and united the military, an innovation unique to America at the time, but it also ushered in the civil rights movement and stimulated political discourse over the treatment of minorities in the country.
African Americans in the United States military have participated in every armed conflict in American history. The policy of allowing African Americans to engage in battle when garrisons were low and then excluding them from the military after the war became an evident pattern established during the Revolutionary War. However, during the Civil War, the emancipation of slaves led to re-evaluation over the implementation of blacks in the military. After the war, Congress authorized the creation of 4 permanent black regiments in the armed forces. Though when the need for a more expansive American military became apparent at the start of World War I, the government required blacks to sign up for the draft when they issued the Selective Service Act of 1917. As a result, new segregated units were formed, but due to racial discrimination, these units were only permitted to serve in the Army, and 90% of them were prevented from engaging in combat.
They were completely misusing black troops. They would have black combat troops, and instead of actually sending them to the front to fight, they would, get them to unload ships or use them to build roads and do, hard labor. So they were completely misusing the manpower that they had.
When World War II began, standard policy was modified to allow blacks to enlist in every branch of the military.
Everything then was segregated. It was segregated. You left here segregated. You went into service segregated. When you took your training, it was segregated. The only time you integrated was when you was on the battlefield. If you was on the front, all you wanted was somebody on the side of you, in the back of you, on the front of you. It didn't make any difference what they were.
Although segregation was discernible in every branch of the armed forces, the feeling of unity among troops during battle impacted the minds of many white soldiers. 80% of white servicemen believed African American troops performed well, and 69% realized that black soldiers could perform just as well as white soldiers if they received desegregated training. After the war, continued segregationist propaganda prompted many blacks to question whether they wanted to die for a country that denied them basic civil rights.
When they stopped to eat, you eat in the front, and we had to go around the back, around the side, and come in the back door and eat in the kitchen. I asked myself the question, when I went in what country? What am I fighting for?
African American servicemen returned proudly to the U.S., hoping to attain more equality after bravely serving in the war. Instead, increased racial tension, societal segregation, and an abrupt surge of racially motivated lynchings and beatings shocked the returning veterans. Furious with the adverse reception of the black veterans, African Americans quickly brought the issue of segregation to the attention of President Harry S. Truman through peaceful protests.
After World War II, President Truman focused on the lack of progress toward equal rights in the military and the numerous atrocities committed against black servicemen. Previous actions during his presidency, such as the Gillum Board investigation and the 5th Platoon Project, promoted the idea of military desegregation.
What the 5th Platoon Project did was it took platoons of black soldiers and integrated them into companies of white soldiers. So this was the first time in World War II, anyway, that they actually combined black and white soldiers. And they found that when the soldiers were fighting together, they actually ended up building a little bit more respect for each other.
In September 1945, the Gillum Board was organized to prepare a new policy regarding the use of black manpower. Their published report encouraged the integration of divisions in the peacetime army and was recognized as progress toward military racial equality. However, necessary changes were not made, and Truman, infuriated by the poor treatment of African Americans in the armed forces, desired to amend these injustices.
In December of 1946, Truman appointed the President's Committee on Civil Rights. 10 months later, the committee issued a report condemning the existence of segregation, specifically targeting the armed forces, and recommending it be immediately discontinued. Finally, in January 1948, pressured by African American leaders pushing for equality and risking his political career, Truman made the crucial decision to end segregation in the military. On July 26, 1948, he issued Executive Order 9981, which stated,
"There shall be equality of treatment and opportunity for all persons in the armed services without regard to race, color, religion, or national origin."
This order was intended to effectively integrate all units of the military and was a monumental step toward civil equality. To enforce his administrative action, Truman created the Fahey Committee, which helped revise the segregated policies of the armed services.
Any denial of human rights is a denial of the basic beliefs of democracy. Harry S. Truman.
Although many military leaders defended segregation, the Navy admitted that only 5 of its 45,000 officers were African American. 3 months before the Korean War, the Army agreed to abolish its 10% recruitment quota for African Americans, which had previously restricted black enlistment. When the war commenced, white combat units suffered heavy casualties, and the Army responded by integrating black soldiers who could not be absorbed into segregated African American units.
When you're in a life and death struggle, which war is, you can't discriminate. You have to accept people on the basis of merit.
By March of 1951, all basic training within the United States had been desegregated, and 2 years later the Army announced that 95% of its African American soldiers had been effectively integrated.
For 80 years after the Civil War, it seemed as though blacks would never get the full equality they desired, with so much prejudice present in the nation.
On the top of the step, they had a drinking fountain, and it said, "For white only." And so if I'm in there and I need a drink, now around the corner somewhere else, they had one said for black. So that's the type of mentality they had.
By eliminating segregated units in the armed forces, Truman unified the U.S. military, thus strengthening its power and influencing black soldiers to fight for the American cause. His dedication towards equality for African Americans inspired many to begin questioning other policies that limited their freedoms.
It was a dramatic act against racial discrimination and unfairness and injustice and inequality, and really made a rather important announcement to American society that segregation itself was in a fundamental way un-American.
That was a small move. Somebody looked at and said, "Oh, that ain't gonna change nothing." But once you start a movement, it keeps moving.
This prompted other institutions to consider integration and spurred one of the most important judicial turning points in American history. The Supreme Court's decision in the Brown v. Board of Education dismantled the basis for racial segregation in schools and other public facilities by declaring it discriminatory. Ultimately, Executive Order 9981 not only offered African Americans equal opportunity in the military, it united blacks to fight for true political and social equality. It soon laid the foundation for future policies concerning human rights and launched the start of the civil rights movement. Following Truman's presidency, an era of civil rights reform swept the nation, and today the U.S. Army is considered America's most successful effort at racial integration. Colin Powell, the country's first African-American Secretary of State, embodies the military's current openness. None of these advancements would have been possible without Harry Truman's spark of innovation, known as Executive Order 9981, which shone brightly among a sea of controversy.